Proverbs 30, 18 through 19. There are three things that are too amazing for me, four that I do not understand. The way of an eagle in the sky, the way of a snake on a rock, the way of a ship on the high seas, and the way of a man with a maiden. In our brief time together, we're going to be looking at and discussing one of the most wonderful, mysterious things in this world, and that is the relationship between a man and a woman. And for those of you who are hoping to talk about snakes on rocks, I apologize. But we're not going to be talking necessarily about sex or marriage, but instead that time beforehand. That time when most people are going out with different people, shopping around, if you will, trying to figure out what they want. That's the time we're going to look at, because that's the time I happen to be living in right now. How many of you are familiar with the idea of courtship? How many people have heard something about it? Okay, a lot of people. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, basic idea behind it, you're going to wait until you're ready to get married. You're going to have your parents be a big part of the decision. You're not going to date. And there has been a lot going around about courtship lately. I have seen numerous books. There's all kinds of material out there. In fact, the other day, I got this newsletter that's called Basic Digest, and it's brothers and sisters in Christ relating without dating. A newsletter for people who believe in courtship. And so I looked at that, and I said, you know what I'm going to do? What we really need is we need a courtship soap opera. Think about it. I'm going to do this. Just picture this. As the world courts. Martha, you know, it's so wonderful. I have absolutely no romantic feelings towards you at all. Oh, John, it's so beautiful being out here under the stars with our parents on both sides and in between us. But I'm not really here to talk about dating and courtship necessarily. I'm here to talk about principles. That's what I want to look at with you today. And before we get into that, there are a couple things you have to understand about me. You have to understand where I'm coming from. First of all, I'm a real sucker for romance, okay? And I really like girls, which is a terrible combination. I remember the time the first time I asked a girl to be my wife. And I'll never forget it either. I was visiting my uncle's church, who lives in Louisiana. She was the pastor's daughter, fell head over heels in love with this girl. And I can still picture sitting on the steps of the church and asking her that question. It was so beautiful. The only problem with it was that I was 3 years old at the time, and she didn't end up waiting for me either. So, but that's where I'm coming from. I've got this background. I grew up with the idea, because of my friends, because of the people I was around, that you had a girlfriend, or you always wanted to have a girlfriend, and this is the way everybody does it, and this is a good thing. It's a nutritious part of this teenage experience. And here I am at 19 years old, and I've got everything together in the sense of really being able to pursue some girl, in the sense of, you know, I can drive now. Before I was 16, obviously I couldn't do that. Didn't have much money then either. I've got these things together, and if ever there was a time to pursue relationships and to do a lot of this stuff, now would be the time. And yet, at this point in my life, I've turned my back on it. Turned my back on old attitudes towards relationships. Turned my back on old behavior. And I'm doing things differently than most of my friends. I would say a majority of my friends. I'm not dating. I'm not pursuing any romantic relationships with anyone. Now, why would anybody want to do that? Especially this guy who's a sucker for romance, who's grown up like this, who has the capability to do it now. Why would anybody turn their back on it? That's the question that I hope to answer in our time together. But my motivation, and this has to be understood, is that I look around at the people I know, at the world around me, and I see a lot of confusion, a lot of hurt, a lot of problems. Whether it's the sexually transmitted diseases, whether it's the girls who are getting pregnant, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, whether it's just the broken hearts that we never see. I see the marriages that are based on that system falling apart, and I look at that and I say, I want something better. I want God's best. And that is my motivation for doing this. It's not because anybody is making me do it. It's because I want God's best. But the thing that I've realized is that to get God's best, you have to play by His rules. And that is what's tough. It's not a matter of wanting the good thing. The question is, are you willing to do what is necessary? As you look at the relationship between a man and a woman, the way the Bible talks about it, you realize that God holds it in high esteem. He thinks it's very special. It's very sacred. And as a result of that, He's created boundaries around it to protect it. He's saying, this is so wonderful, this is so good, that I only want it to take place in this setting, in this context. That which is good and sacred, God establishes boundaries around and guidelines for us to follow. We have to have the same reverence for the relationship that He does. Now, I'm reminded of a story of a little boy and a little girl. Little boy had a bag of marbles, and the little girl had a bag of candy. One day the little boy goes to the girl and says, I'll trade you. So the girl, she's been eyeing these marbles for a while. She says, yeah, I guess I'll do that. So they go to get their marbles and their candy, and the little boy goes in, and he gets his bag of marbles, but he stops. And he thinks, there are some of these that I just can't part with. Some of my best ones. So he takes out 3 or 4 of his favorites, puts those under the bed, goes and makes the trade. She never knows. But that night, when the little girl is fast asleep, that little boy is wide awake. And you know what he's wondering? I wonder if she kept her best candy. Now, I tell that story because a lot of times as Christians, we're always asking God, God, is this your best? God, I want your best. But we can't even ask that question until we've given God our all. Are you willing to give up old ways of looking at relationships, old attitudes, to get God's best? The thing I think is so difficult about doing that, the thing that's so difficult about playing by God's rules and about living within His guidelines, is that we live in a just-do-it world today. Everything goes. Nothing is sacred. Nothing is special. There are no guidelines. I was in the library the other day, and I picked up a magazine, I think it was YM, and I was just wanting to flip through and see what they were talking about when it came to, the whole guy-girl thing. And they've got these articles about what to do when you've had sex with a guy and then he expects that after that. And I'm thinking, wow, this is so far out compared to where I am right now. But there are no guidelines. There's nothing special about it. If it feels good, do it. Go for it. That's the world we're living in. And as Christians, the trap that we fall into often, I believe, is that we're living in this just-do-it world, and we think that just because we're doing some of it, we're doing okay. Well, gosh, compared to these guys that are, sleeping together and doing all this stuff, I'm doing great. But you know something? God is not asking us to compare ourselves to the world and judge ourselves by the world's standards. He's asking us, line yourself up to my standards. If you want my best, you're going to have to play by my rules. And we do that, we find out that many of us are falling short when it comes to the area of relationships. The Pharisees were like this in Jesus' day. They thought they had everything down. They were good about keeping the outside appearance up and everything they did there. And they had so twisted God's laws with their own vain traditions. They come to Jesus, they think they have everything together, and they say, well, what about adultery? And Jesus looks them in the eye and says, I tell you, if you've looked at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery with her. He raised the stakes like that. He said, I look at the heart. And we've been asking the wrong questions for so long as Christians. How far can we go? How much can we get away with? The question we need to be asking is, how far can we go to please God? Because we've been so distracted with the whole issue of what can we get away with, as if God has some sort of sex alert button up in heaven, you know, where you go past a certain point and this thing starts going, meow, 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 you know? But there are some very important truths that we've forgotten about in the process. And so I want to look at 4, getting back to truth. The first one, number 1, is our ideas about love are a lot different than God's. The other day I was in the mall. There's this place in downtown Portland. It's called Pioneer Square. It has all these great shops and everything. And in the middle of it, they have all these escalators that are running up and down to the different levels, you know. And it's so hilarious to watch these couples going up and down the escalators, because couples have this way of just, you know, meshing their bodies on escalators or something. You know, one will turn around and they'll be whispering in each other's ears and going up and down. And I was sitting there and I was watching all these people, and I was realizing that a lot of times when I think of love, that's what I think of. I think of the warm and cuddly. I think of, you know, a couple holding hands or kissing or doing all this stuff. That's love. They must be in love. You know, they like to talk to each other. They're so in love. But when you look at God's definition of love, it's so much different. I want to read you the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13:4. We've all heard this many times. But as I'm reading this to you, I want you to think of maybe a relationship with somebody else that you've had, or a friend that you know that's in the midst of a regular dating relationship. And I want to ask yourself, is their relationship like this? Is it this kind of love? Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. God's definition of love has a lot more to do with commitment than it does with warm fuzzies and tingles running up your spine. You know, so many people in the Christian community talk about the way we're doing things, dating, this whole system, as if it's some sort of training for marriage. You know, kids need to do this because it's getting them ready to learn how to relate and all these different things. If that's true, if dating is training for marriage, in practice, we're practicing the wrong thing. It doesn't have anything to do with God's definition of love. It's what can you do for me? And if I get tired of this and this doesn't work out, then we can break up. And I can find somebody else. It becomes nothing more than a training ground for divorce. You know, when you look back at the way things have developed in our country, the history of dating, it's interesting to see that the real revolution behind dating, the way we do things now, is that it was a change of motive. It's like people suddenly realized, you know, we can have the whole romantic side and we can do all this stuff without commitment. And that's what we've done. The second truth that we need to get back to, and follow me on this one, is that the right thing at the wrong time is the wrong thing. Ecclesiastes 3:1-8. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to uproot. a time to scatter stones and to gather them together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain. God has certain things for our lives, good things, things that are right things. But he also has a special season for those things. And the mistake that we make is that because we know it is a good thing, and it can be a good thing in its right season, we take it out of its season and think that it's still the right thing. But if there is a right time and a season for everything, there also must be a wrong time. Look at it this way, as an analogy. You girls will relate to this. The way most people do it these days when it comes to relationships and dating is a lot like window shopping, okay? You go to the stores and you don't have any money, all right? You have no money. You're not going to be able to buy anything. But you just want to look, because when you do have money, you'll want to know what you like, right? The only problem is, while you're walking along, you see this outfit. And it's just the perfect outfit. And it's so wonderful. But you don't have any money. But you say to yourself, I'll just try it on. I'll just see how it feels on me and how it works on me. And so you try it on. And it looks great. It's the perfect thing. And you say to yourself, if God didn't want me to have this, he wouldn't have let me find it. But you don't have any money, and you can't do anything about it. So what do? Well, you can go to the clerk and say, can I put this on hold for like 5 years? Now, we laugh at that. But you know what? That's how most of us approach relationships. We're shopping around before we can do anything about it. And we might meet somebody that really is a wonderful person, and it might be the right thing. But if it's the wrong thing, wrong time, it's the wrong thing. What happens is we end up in the struggle between God's timetable and our timetable. I had a close friend while we were in high school. We haven't kept in touch now. But when we were in youth group together, he was one of the most on-fire guys in the whole youth group. Loved the Lord, wanted to serve the Lord with all his heart, wanted to make a difference in this world. He went to South Africa with the missions team, South America, 2 summers in a row. This guy wanted to change the world. He wanted to make a difference for Jesus. Then he met a girl, fell madly in love with her. And I remember one night, after we hadn't seen each other for a while, running into him at the grocery store. And I stopped and I said, you know, what are you doing? How are you going towards your goals and everything that you want to do? We wanted to get some training, go to college and do a lot of different things there. And he said, well, you know, things aren't working out exactly right. And it was so disappointing to see this guy who had lost his vision for what he wanted to do because of this relationship. And I was asking him, you know, what about all these things? What about these dreams that you had? And he said, Josh, you just don't understand. This is the right thing. If you ever really fall in love, you'll understand. And I said, buddy, I'm not doubting that you're really in love with this girl. But could it be it's the right thing at the wrong time? And he said, I'll have to think about that. They ended up falling into a sexual relationship for a while. They thought she was pregnant. He moved out of his house. Then they found out that she wasn't pregnant. Then she decided that she wasn't sure that he was really the one for her. Then he renounced his faith. Turned his back on everything. Jesus said in Matthew 6:24, no one can serve 2 masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. And what happened with my friend's life, and I'm still praying that he'll come back to the Lord, is that he was trying to serve 2 masters. He had his timetable and his idea of when it should happen, and God's timetable. And he couldn't serve both. He ended up hating one. The right thing at the wrong time is the wrong thing. The fourth, or the third truth that we need to get back to is that there's more to save for marriage than sex. When I say that, there's a lot of impatience out there today. And there's been a lot said about saving sex for marriage, and that's fantastic. That's wonderful. It needs to be happening, and I'm excited about the thousands of teenagers, really, that are making a commitment to stay pure physically until marriage. But you know what we're impatient for? We're impatient for the emotional side of things. You know, we see couples and we think, okay, we can't have the sex now because that's really wrong. I mean, that's obviously wrong. But let's act like we're married, basically. I call it the hot and now mentality. I named it after a chain of restaurants, a burger joint up in Oregon. And the idea behind hot and now is it's a drive-in restaurant. You don't get out and eat there. You just drive through. The food is hot, and it's now, and it's cheap, and the French fries taste like cardboard. Okay? Well, the mentality of the person that goes in there is, I'm in a rush. I'm impatient. I can't wait for something better, and I'm willing to eat this stuff because I'm in a rush. And that's the same mentality that so many young people have towards relationships. I don't want to wait for that. I don't want to wait for the emotional and physical gratification of marriage. I want to take some of this outside of it. Greg Spencer has an article that's called Emotional Fornication. I hope to print this soon in New Attitude. But he talks about premarital possessiveness. He says, certainly physical fornication is a perversion of a good gift reserved for marriage, but is sexual intimacy the only experience thus restricted? Are married couples like everyone else except in this regard? No. In fact, the sex act is merely a demonstration of what truly sets marriage apart, the pledge of loyalty between the partners. It follows then, if certain physical expressions reserved for marriage can be perverted into a physical fornication, then certain expressions of loyalty reserved for marriage can be perverted into an emotional fornication. And that's what so many of us do. We make a claim on these other people. I own you. You know, so many of my good friends of mine, they're in these relationships, and for all intents and purposes, they might as well be married. You know what I mean? The way they act. Well, what are you doing? They do everything together, and, you know, they might as well be married. But we make these claims on other people. And I love what Elizabeth Elliot has to say about this in her book, Passion and Purity. She writes, unless a man is prepared to ask a woman to be his wife, what right has he to claim her exclusive attention? Unless she's been asked to marry him, why would a sensible woman promise any man her exclusive attention? If, when the time has come for a commitment, and she gets a little harsh here, he is not man enough to ask her to marry him, she should give him no reason to presume that she belongs to him. And yet that's what so many of us do. And because we do this, because we tie ourselves down with these relationships where really there's no commitment, the person can walk out if somebody cuter comes along at any time, we're really getting the worst of both worlds. We're tied down as if we were married, but we don't have the full commitment there. And this leads to the final truth that we need to get back to, which many people have forgotten, is that being unmarried is a gift from God. Not necessarily a permanent gift, like you get something in the mail, you're not going to ever be married. Oh, thanks, God. No, but this time in your life is a special gift from God. It's a special opportunity to give Him your undivided attention. Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians 7:32 through 35. He says, an unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife, and his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. but a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. I am saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. God wants us to view this time as a very special time that we won't be able to have again. Most people use this time for study because they're able to immerse themselves in that. They don't have the same responsibilities. And this is a wonderful time to serve God now. It's a gift. He wants us to see it like that. But you know, so many of us don't. We have what I call the all I need is the girl mentality. And I got this from a song. Do you mind if I sing it to you? Okay. I wish I had my big band up here to back me up, but I don't. It goes like this. Got my tweed pressed, got my best vest. All I need now is the girl. I got my striped tie, I've got my hopes so high. I've got the time and the place and the rhythm. All I need is the girl to go with them. If she would just appear, we'd take this big town, and I can never hit this note, for a whirl. And if she would just say, oh baby, I love you, then I'd throw away my striped tie. I'd throw away my best pressed tweed, 'cause all I really need is the girl. Thank you. Now, we look at that song and, you know, it's a cute song. This guy has a lot going for him. He's got his striped tie. He's got his best pressed tweed. He's got all these things. But if only he had that relationship with that girl, then he'd really be happy. And he'd be ready to throw away everything that he has if he could just have the girl. All I need is the girl. Now you may look at that and say, well, that's dumb. If I found a girl, I wouldn't throw away my tie, I'd keep it, you know? But the point is that God has given us so much at this point in time. Whether it's the relationships that we have with other people of the same sex, of the opposite sex that we just don't appreciate because they're not romantic relationships, whether it's the relationships with our family, this special time in our life where we can give undivided devotion to the Lord. We don't appreciate any of these things because we're walking around saying, all I need is the girl, all I need is the guy. If I had that, then I'd be happy. And we're ready to throw all that away at the drop of a hat. And I think God must just shake his head to say, if you had any idea how special this time is in your life, if you had any idea, you know, I've got some things planned for you, but can you just wait and just enjoy what you've got right now? John Fisher, who wrote this when he was single at the time, talks about realizing your potential now. God has called me to live now, not 4 years from now. He wants me to realize my full potential as a man right now, to be thankful for that, and to enjoy it to the fullest. I have a feeling that a single person who was always wishing he were married will probably get married, discover all that is involved, and wish he were single again. He'll ask himself, why didn't I use that time when I didn't have so many other obligations to serve the Lord? Why didn't I give myself totally to him then? Now, marriage is a wonderful thing, and I don't think he's implying that it isn't. But when I find that girl, I want to be able to give myself to her totally and not have regrets about the way I spent my time before that. This is the time to be preparing, at least for me, to be preparing to be the husband, the father that she wants. You see, if you spend this time shopping around, looking around, worrying about this all the time, you really do a disservice to whoever that person is, because you threw away this time. It's a result of realizing some of these truths that I've made a commitment. I call it a commitment to pursue God's best. And I share this with you so that you can have an idea of what it looks like to say, okay, I want to use this time. I want to view it as a gift. My commitment is this. I will view my unmarried years as a gift from God to be used in preparation and undivided service to Him. I will not pursue any romantic relationship in my mind or in action until I, along with my parents, feel I'm ready for marriage. Now, if you look at that and you say, yes, that's something that I want to do. I look around me and I see my friends and I see the problems with the way everybody else is doing it. I want something different. I want God's best. And this is how you would go about living it. 5 steps. Number 1, start with a clean slate. There was one relationship that I was in for close to 2 years. She was a great girl. We'd met in the youth group, and we really did everything the right way, in the sense of she was over at the house, or we would do things in a family context and all these different things. You know, we could justify it and say, well, we're really doing the courtship thing, but you know, we're 16 and 17 years old, and it's just the right thing, but at the wrong time. And as I started realizing some of these things, and I wanted to make this commitment to do things differently, we had to end that relationship, and that's not easy. It's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done before. And I praise the Lord that we're still good friends. She's probably one of our family's best friends. But start with a clean slate. First of all, repent of past behavior and past attitudes. Second step, make your parents your teammates. And I can't stress this enough. If there's anything that's so important, it's to make your parents your teammates for accountability and for wisdom. Accountability so that they can be asking you questions. You're having to answer their questions. Well, what are you thinking about this? Now, this doesn't line up with what you're wanting to do. And for wisdom, to go to them and say, what do you think about this? You need that team in place. One of the most wonderful things for me in the last couple of years is to be able to go to my parents and talk about girls with them. It's great. It really is. You know, and there are people who I can go to my mom and my dad, and say, why am I thinking about this girl? I should not be thinking about this girl. I don't need to be thinking about this girl. I'm not thinking about this girl. You know what I mean? And they can say, that's right. And they can be a support in that. And once you form that team, establish the protective boundaries. Okay? Get together and work on this together. I don't want to try and lay out everything that you need to do. There's been a lot written about ways to live this, and that's something that you need to work on together. And to help you do that, before I came, I put together, it's the New Attitudes Dating and Courtship Resource List. And I listed on here books, tapes that I found helpful, just all these different things related to courtship. It's more in-depth, and it'll help you out, so stop by our table and you can pick up a copy of this. But these are decisions that you need to make as a team, you and your parents. And you need to help them. They need to help you establish those boundaries so that if you meet somebody and you start trying to justify things and cut corners, they can say, hey, you established these boundaries with us. We want to help you stick to them, and it's so important to have that backup there. Number 4, check who's whispering in your ear. Sometimes it's hard for me because I've got buddies who have girlfriends and are going out with people, and you know, you hang out with them long enough and you're just like, that looks so nice, you know? Because they've got their girlfriend, they've got their boyfriend, and, you know, they go places together, and they're a couple, and that's great. Another thing is to look at the things you're reading, the music you're listening to, the movies you're watching. Check out those things. And if those things are pulling you down, constantly fighting it or what you believe, then be willing to say, okay, I'm going to cut some of this stuff out. And the 5th step in living it is to trust God with the details. And this, I believe, is the hardest thing about courtship. You know, so many people come and they ask me about this, and they're like, well, I don't understand exactly how it's going to work out. What if you're at college, or what if this happens, or can you do this, or what about this? And they come up with all these situations, whatever. And I don't really think courtship should work, so I don't think that's for me. Well, how is this going to work out, Josh? How would this happen? What would you do in this situation? Or can you be alone? If you just got engaged, are you allowed to hold hands? Are you allowed to da-da-da-da-da-da? And I look at them and I say with complete confidence, I have no idea. And I don't. And we don't need to. We don't need to know how every step is going to unfold. But God has called us to live by His standards. He said, this is so special, I want you to save it for the commitment and the sacredness of marriage. And when He does that, He says, trust me in the details. You just do what you know is right. Abraham in the Old Testament was an example of somebody who learned to trust God in the details. He had a lot of trouble with it to start out, which is kind of funny when you think about the fact that he's known for his faith, the faith of Abraham. But when he was first getting started with God, I guess you could say, he didn't always know. You know, God said, okay, I'm going to make you a great nation. But when he'd go into a town with his wife Sarah, evidently Sarah was just a babe or something, you know? And so he would say, honey, tell him you're my sister because I don't want to get killed, you know? God has promised me this, but I think I better help him out here, you know? I better cover my backside, right? And the Lord said, Abraham, what are you doing? Don't do that. He did this a couple times. God said to him, Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation. Now, to become a great nation, you got to have kids. He didn't have any kids. And his wife is getting really old now. So he sits here and he says, God has promised me this, but he needs a little help. He needs me to, you know, get in there and work through some of the details for him. So he has a son through his wife's maidservant. God says, no, that's not my plan. Abraham, trust me with the details. Finally, Sarah conceived and bore Isaac. But then there's one last test. God rang Abraham up and said, Abraham, I want you to sacrifice that son. And after all this time of struggling with trusting God in the details, Abraham learned his lesson. And he said, okay. And I don't know what he was thinking as he raised that knife and was about to plunge it into his only son, but I know he must have been relieved when he heard that voice that said, stop. There's the lamb. He finally learned to trust me in the details. And that's what God has called us to do. We don't need to know how everything is going to work out. We don't need to know how everything is going to unfold. We just have to want God's best and to be willing to have the faith to know that if we walk within His guidelines, He will give us that. Elizabeth Elliot talks about this same thing, once again in Passion and Purity. She's talking about her relationship with Jim Elliot and the time that they were putting off their own desires and their own wants because they wanted to serve the Lord. We were being asked to trust, to leave the planning to God. God's ultimate plan was far beyond our imaginings, as the oak tree is from the acorn's imaginings. The acorn does what it was made to do without pestering its maker with questions about when and how and why. We who have been given an intelligence and a will and a whole range of wants that can be set against the divine pattern of good are asked to believe Him. We are given the chance to trust Him when He says to us, if any man will let himself be lost for my sake, he will find his true self. When will we find it, we ask? The answer is trust me. How will we find it? The answer again is trust me. Why must I let myself be lost? We persist. The answer is look at the acorn and trust me. And that's our challenge. To leave behind the world's way of doing things. To say, I want God's best, and I'm willing to give up those things that maybe you've always held to, those things that everybody else is doing. But do you want God's best? Are you willing to wait for His timing? I hope that you'll have the courage to do that. In closing, I'd like to read a poem to you as a challenge to the young girls and the young guys that are here. It's a little old-fashioned. It's called A Woman's Question. Do you know you have asked for the costliest thing? ever made by the hand above? A woman's heart and a woman's life and a woman's wonderful love. Do you know you have asked for this priceless thing as a child might ask for a toy, demanding what others have died to win with the reckless dash of a boy? You have written my lesson of duty out, man-like you have questioned me. Now stand at the bars of my woman's soul until I shall question thee. You require your mutton shall always be hot, your socks and your shirt be whole. I require your heart be as true as God's stars, and as pure as his heaven, your soul. You require a cook for your mutton and beef. I require a far greater thing. A seamstress you're wanting for socks and shirts. I look for a man and a king. A king for the beautiful realm called home, and a man that his maker God shall look upon as he did on the first and say, it is very good. I am fair and young, but the rose may fade from this soft young cheek one day. Will you love me then, mid the falling leaves, as you did among the blossoms of May? Is your heart an ocean so strong and true, I may launch my all on its tide? A loving woman finds heaven or hell on the day she is made a bride. If you cannot be this, a laundress and cook you can hire, and little to pay. But a woman's heart and a woman's life are not to be won that way. The young ladies that are here, I would say this: don't ever lower your standards for any young guy. And any guy that asks you to is not worth your time. And to the young men that are here, never underestimate or forget the costliness, the pricelessness of a woman's heart. And never abuse that, please. I've done things, I've broken a girl's heart before. And I believe, I know that I'm going to answer to God for that. We serve a God who sees the sparrow fall. And I've repented of that, and it's my prayer that I never do that again. But I would challenge you to spend these years now becoming the man that is worthy of a woman's heart, a woman's life, and a woman's wonderful love. Thank you very much.